It's Saturday afternoon. The museum just closed. We had a great day today. We had junior racing at Southwick. Took a first place in the 80s vintage class on a CR 500 and a fourth against the modern bikes in the 250B class. So have some great footage of that coming. But today we are also speaking with Carl on the part 2 of the Indian motorcycle history. So I've been in the industry forever, but to have a guy like Carl who's totally obsessed with the motorcycle history, he's a guru. He's going to give us a rundown of the part 2 of the Indian motorcycle history on the second floor of the museum here. Where is he? There he is. Carl, what's happening, my man?
Hey, how you doing, Ken?
I know you had a big day today with Doug Danger here and the book signing and everything.
Yeah.
So where did we leave off last week?
Well, we left off just before World War One on our Indian history. So anyways, folks, welcome to History at the Museum. Today we're going to pick up where we left off last week. And we're going to take a walk over by this beautiful 37 Chief over here. Come on over here.
Wow, that's a beauty.
You know, I kind of want to recap a couple of things that we talked about last week because this history is so incredible. If you remember, in 1913, Indian became the world's largest producer of motorcycles in 1913, and they produced 32,000 bikes. I want to think about this for a minute because as a guy who was in manufacturing for my entire life, okay, 32,000 machines in 1 year. If you do the math, if you work a 6-day week, that's 76 bikes a day. And Ken's the only guy I know who could tell me how many trucks that takes to move.
That's a lot of trucks.
Okay, now to make 76 bikes a day, imagine this. Between 1901 and 1913, these guys had to install thousands upon thousands of machines. They had to engineer processes, milling, drilling, turning, swaging, grinding, forging, casting. Thousands and thousands of operations had to be planned out. Hundreds and hundreds of operators had to be trained. And basically, in 1913, life was good in Springfield. But with the good comes the bad. Oscar Hedstrom resigns over dubious practices of the board of directors to attract investors. In 1915, George Hendy steps down as general manager but continues on as president for another year, and then he resigns because of clashes with the board of directors. But process still goes on. 1916, Indian hired engineer Charlie Franklin, who was the second place, he placed second place in a 1911 Isle of Man TT. He was a trained engineer. He was a former engineer for the government of Ireland. He came to India, and his first projects were the Scout and the Chief. But prior to producing the Scout and the Chief, in 1916, Indian produced the Model 221 lightweight. It was a small single-cylinder two-stroke. It was only in production for 1 year, and then they dropped it for the Model O, which was a flat twin four-stroke, which stayed in production until 1919. 1920, the Scout was produced. This was Charlie Franklin's baby. The Scout came out with a 1,000cc V-twin. All right, 2 years later, the Chief was produced. That had a 1,000cc or 61 cubic inch V-twin based on the Power Plus engine. They only kept it as 1,000cc for 1 year. The following year, 1923, the Chief was increased to 1,200 cc's or 73 cubic inches. Also, a major event in 1923, the company changed its name from Hendy Manufacturing to the Indian Motorcycle Company. Okay, so we're getting there. All right, 1927, Indian purchases Ace motorcycles. Ace made beautiful inline four-cylinder motorcycles. In 1927, Indian just bought them and marketed it as the Indian Ace. But in 1928, 1 year later, they had it redesigned, and it was the 401. which had Indian's front end suspension on it, and it still had the basic Ace motor. And the 401 stayed in production for 1 year, and then they changed it to the 402, which had the basic same power plant, except that it had a stronger double down tube frame. And actually in 1928, Indian added a front brake to the Chief and the Scout. And then something very significant happened in 1930. In 1930, E. Paul Dupont purchased the Indian Motor Company. Now, Paul Dupont's his history is as fascinating as George Hendy and Oscar Hedstrom. Like Oscar Hedstrom, Paul Dupont was fascinated with mechanical things, and he actually made his own engine and put it in a bicycle, very similar to Oscar Hedstrom. Of course, Paul Dupont was born into money. His family started a gunpowder business in 1802 in Delaware, and pretty soon they became the world's largest producer of black powder. Paul's family was interested in Indian as far back as 1923, when his brother Francis invested $300,000 in Indian stock. But anyways, Paul Dupont was probably one of the best things that ever happened to Indian. One of his first missions was to root out corruption, which was rampant at Indian. In the beginning of the Depression, Indian was losing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars every year. And throughout Paul Dupont's career, by the end of the 1930s, they were very, very profitable. But during the Dupont years, they bought it. Paul Dupont also owned the Dupont Motor Company, and Dupont Motor Company made luxury cars. They only produced about 537 cars between 1919 and 1931. In 1932, they went bankrupt, and Paul Dupont focused on Indians. He was very much involved in racing. He was a big supporter of the American Motorcycle Association, and those two facts right there helped them sell bikes. They put them on a racetrack. They won races. They were great. Okay, another thing Paul Dupont was he bought some of his help from the Hudson Motor Company. Now the Hudson Motors, those cars were luxury cars. They compared with Cadillacs, Duesenbergs, Packards, etc. Paul Dupont brought a man with him called Briggs Weaver. Briggs Weaver is the man that invented those beautiful, beautiful full fenders that were installed on the Chiefs and the Scouts in 1940. Okay. Also during the 1930s, this beautiful Indian war bonnet.
Those are the fenders there, that one, right?
Yeah. And also in the 1930s, this beautiful war bonnet became one of their trademarks. And that is gorgeous.
It's stunning.
That is just
to this day that it still
gorgeous.
is. Isn't it?
It
Still
is.
today? Almost 100 years later.
Okay. Let me see. Paul Dupont's connections to the chemical and the paint industry result 1934. Indian offered their motorcycles in 24 different colors.
Wow.
Okay, which is pretty. Now it might be not 24 different colors, but 24 color combinations.
Wow.
Still, okay. Another thing that happened in 1937 that to me is very significant is a guy by the name of Iron Man Ed Kretz.
Heard of him?
Went to the inaugural Daytona 200 and lapped the field with his Indian. Indian has an amazing history of firsts in races.
Wow.
The first ever.
That's no easy task against a bunch of other pros.
No, it isn't. I bet. I don't race. You do, but I can tell you right now, to lap the field
Is unheard of. I don't think it's ever happened again.
It doesn't even happen today.
No, very rarely, if ever.
Anyways, towards the end of the 30s, Indian became very profitable, and one of the reasons was because they were anticipating military orders, and the military orders didn't come through the way they wanted to. We have a Model 741 over here, which was produced to compete with Harley Davidson's 45-inch machine. And the thing is this bike was either too expensive or too heavy. And the military, the U.S. military, really never selected it. However, it was distributed widely on what they call a Lend-Lease program to the Commonwealth allies.
So other military factions.
Right. I mean, now, also at the same time, just before World War II, the United States Army asked Indian and other manufacturers to develop a motorcycle that would perform combat duty in a desert climate. Okay? Indian came out and developed the 841. Okay, now this was a twin cylinder, horizontally opposed, more looks like a modern day Moto Guzzi, 90-degree V-twin, and shaft drive, okay? And at the same time, Harley Davidson was developing a model called the XA. Both of these machines were very similar to the BMW R71. Both had shaft drive, both had horizontally opposed engines. And the fact is that both of them were rejected because the Army finally decided that the Jeep would play a better role, be better suited for the combat role that was initially planned for the 841 and the XA. Indian produced 1,056 841s. Harley Davidson produced about 1,000 XAs. And if you get one, keep it. Harley Davidson went and claimed, because it was a horizontally opposed engine in the Harleys, they claimed that the oil ran 100 degrees cooler.
Wow.
Okay? So, but anyways, in the end, neither of these bikes were selected. And that's pretty much the end of today's history. Next week, we're going to pick up just before World War II, and we're going to continue on, hopefully up into the 60s and the 70s, and that's it. Folks, thank you very much for visiting. Come back again.
Carl, I think we're going to change your name from our roaming diplomat to our roaming guru diplomat, because I've never heard anybody give a Indian history lesson quite as thorough as that from memory. That's really impressive. So thank you.
Well, I do have my cheat sheet, okay? And
You only referred to it once, though.
it is very fascinating. I am a history freak, okay? I love motorcycle history. And I really wish I could get much deeper into this Indian history, but I don't want to bore you guys with stuff like who was on the board of directors, who the investors were, and stuff like that, because even though that matters, in the end, all we want is a little bit of wind in the face.
Do you have a favorite in the Indian, the original Indian lineups up to 54? What do you have a personal favorite Indian?
Well, I was kind of hoping you would ask that. If I had to have a rider, okay, an Indian, I like the 37 Chief over there.
The one on the left?
Right.
Yeah. Why?
And I also, well, because it's clean looking. I'm not really a fan of the big Valance fenders. To me, they look too heavy, but they are an Indian trademark. And if Indian didn't have them, they would not be well known as they are. They stand out.
Now that you pointed out, that does look like a more sleeker, like sportier, more functional look than the big heavy skirts.
Right. The skirts weren't. That bike was produced 3 years before the skirts were installed on the Indians. And then later on in the 40s, they came out with another iconic trademark. That's the Indian head front fender light. Is awesome.
Oh, that was from the 40s?
That's from the 40s, yes, sir.
Wow.
Another thing, Ken, very, very significant that I forgot to add here. Come over and.
They even have that on the new Indians to this day.
Well, they probably do. I want you
of
to take a look at this suspension system, and this is going to freak a lot of people out. In 1940, Indian, not only did they introduce the big fenders, they also introduced the sprung back end called the plunger system. This is coil springs and hydraulic dampening right here. And one fact about this that you can't deny is Indian had rear suspension 18 years before Harley Davidson.
That's huge.
Okay, we have
being a rider
an
and a
example
racer,
of the
that's
first.
huge.
We have an example of the first rear sprung Harley Davidson right over here. It's a beautiful machine, but we're talking about Indian.
So what was the first year Harley had a suspension?
The first year that they put shocks on the back of the big twin was 1958. And they changed the name of the machine from the Hydroglide to the Duoglide because it had shocks on both.
I'm in love with the paint job on this bike. This is one of my favorites. And This is from
Beautiful.
Johnny at Fat City Customs. Owns this bike. He rebuilt this in the frame up. It's an original frame and Harley Davidson panhead motor. 90% original parts, including the tank. Just a fantastic piece. I know this is our Indian history lesson, but this one's going up for sale. Johnny's in the hospital. He's sick right now. I won't expand on that, but his family asked me to sell this precious heirloom. If you want to buy it, give me a call, 860-916-9784. If I don't answer, call Junior at the office at 860-454-7024. It's going to be sold to pay for his medical expenses. So, but not to bring us down, but back to Indian.
Anyways,
So this is the first year. This is a very significant panhead first year suspension. 17 years earlier. 18 years earlier.
1940?
Indian.
1958.
That's like almost for 2 decades. Harley couldn't figure out that rear suspension would be good for your back.
Well, here's why. Harley Davidson had what they called the full floating seat.
Okay.
Okay? It's similar to the seat on this Electric Glide right here. All right? And
it's got a suspension.
And Harley thought that was
That would be
good
enough.
enough. And you know what? For Harley lovers, it was good enough. But it doesn't diminish the fact that Indian had rear suspension 18 years before Harley.
Very cool. What's up for next week? What can we tell our viewers?
We're gonna pick up around World War II, but next week you're gonna hear after owner after owner after owner after owner of Indian. And now back to my favorite Indian. I think if I was gonna ride one and own one, it would probably be one of the Gilroys with the bottle cap engine.
It would be a very similar build to your Harley Davidson. That's
Right.
Same design
Right.
era. In order to start some interaction here, are there any questions? Because our viewers can ask questions. Is there any comments, questions you'd like to hear, or requests from the viewers for your weekly show?
Whatever they want to ask, I can't promise that I can answer everything. The history on an Indian, it's pretty hard to study because most of the sources all have the same information. It's like they copied Wikipedia, okay? But
You've seen that before. I do that all the time.
there are a few things that I personally would like to know. I would like to know who was on the board of directors back in 1910. I would like to know who was appointed president after George Hendy left. Okay, I know about the engineering side, but
Maybe some of our viewers might be able to. Are you going to interact with the viewers on the comment section?
I will.
You have the login for the.
Right.
Can you answer the comments and questions on your show?
I hope so.
Okay. All right. If you don't, we'll give you the login. So Carl will be. If you have questions, comments, suggestions on this Indian history, where are we picking up next week?
We're going to pick up just before World War II.
Okay. And then when will it, are you going to go all the way to
I'm going
2020?
all the way to 2021.
Okay.
Okay, so this is going to go until next year.
Okay. So you Indian lovers out there, stay tuned. After that, I'm not sure what will be next, but we've got BSA Triumph Harley Davidson. This is one of Carl's favorites over here, the Nimbus 4-cylinder, and he could give you a full half-hour show just on that. I'm confident.
I can't wait till that show.
So stay tuned, folks. More coming from our roaming diplomat guru, Carl himself, and his beautiful wife, Kim, who doesn't want to be on the camera, but she's over there supporting the museum. They volunteer every weekend, and you can't find a better tour guide than this guy right here. He's a virtual walking thesaurus on most of these vintage bikes. If you want to come down and get a little history lesson or just discuss with him, I'm sure you have an excellent conversation. So thank you once again for all your time and effort. We're super grateful for you and your wife, Kim, keeping the museum and the history alive here for everybody.
It's my pleasure. I love to be here. I love to be surrounded by vintage motorcycles. Except let me explain one thing. I just learned the definition of vintage today.
Okay.
And that says, here at the New England Motorcycle Museum, we only have 2 vintage motorcycles.
Okay.
We have a 1928 BMW R62 and a 1929 Harley Davidson Model DL.
Is that one?
That's that one right there. And I just learned today that vintage is before 1930.
Well, guys, if you have any vintage before 1930 bikes, we need some here, so bring them down. All these bikes, most of them are on loan from friends and family and local Senator Scott Franz loaned that Harley Davidson right there. A local collector loaned these Indians. The New Britain Police Department actually gave us that one there. just a bunch of friends and family, local shop owners. We own a bunch of bikes here too, throughout the museum, but 80% plus are on loan from friends and family. This is Mark Summers from Mastercam. A lot of local business owners got involved, so that's what keeps us ticking here, is the involvement of volunteers and people owning our bikes. That's the horsepower man's 159 horsepower Dyna rocket ship. His son Cody is our sales manager here, so get involved.
Okay, let me correct you on that. Cody just corrected me. I've been telling everybody that's 151 rear wheel horsepower. Cody said his father detuned it. It's only 130 horsepower now.
Only 130, which is insanely fast for a Harley. So I guess maybe made it a little more streetable. I rode that thing. It's a rocket ship. But if you want to get involved, do so in the comments section.
Yeah.
And if you want to display a bike here, come down on the weekend and talk to Carl or his wife Kim or call us.
Volunteer, I can train you. This is a very simple, it's an awesome place to spend time. If you love being around classic old motorcycles, this is the greatest place to be.
Awesome. We'll come back next week, folks, for episode 4 of the Indian history. Or is it episode 3?
No,
4. Episode 4. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned, and as always, God bless America. And God bless Indian Motorcycle Company, which is now owned by Polaris, but Carl will explain that next week, probably.
Nah, that's going to be a few weeks off.
All right, thank you very much, Carl.
Okay.
God bless.